I just want to try and give you a snapshot of some of the work that I've been involved in previously as a police officer, also as a person. Like we heard from Karen, I also grew up in a fairly tough housing scheme in Glasgow called Castlemilk, which at one time was the largest housing estate in the whole of Europe, with little or no infrastructure or decent services. And however, I eventually made it into the police and into the VRU, the Violence Reduction Unit, which have only just this week set up their own London office to tackle the gang violence that we know all about in and around London. When I talk about violence, I talk about public space violence and private space violence being interpersonal in whatever way that may be carried out. However, the profile of violence in London is much different to the profile of violence that we had in Glasgow. I think in London it's very much more focused on gang violence, but the gang violence down here seems to have expanded into social media and a stronger prevalence of drug supplying, which is very unfortunate. However, it's fair to say that Glasgow has passed on the mantle as the murder capital of Europe onto London. Great, however, when we were the murder capital of Europe and Scotland, it was the only league table that we topped in the whole of the world. So in some senses it's not so good. It's all about the people. We heard Jenny's discussion yesterday about power, and I thought that was very accurate and very telling. It's all about the people, always has been, always will be. When I started out in the police, in the CID, Criminal Investigation Department, I was based in an area called Paisley, which is a fairly large landmass, but in relative terms, a small population. However, at that time, we had around 2 murders per month, which was astronomical. And at that time, that was linked to a drugs turf war that just went out of control. Now, that was the early 90s, when in the police, all we did was respond to incidents. We waited for the crisis to happen, and then we responded with all of the other services. And I used to come into the CID office on a Saturday and Sunday morning, and the office was littered with brown paper bags. These were the bags full of blood-stained clothing with stab holes through the clothing, and another dead body lying in the mortuary. And after doing that for a number of years, I'm quite slow in the uptake, I began to realise there must be a different way of doing things. And even when I went back to that area years later, when I was promoted, we were locking up the sons, daughters and the grandchildren of the people that we had dealt with previously. So, moving on, I was fortunate enough to be seconded into the Violence Reduction Unit. And that changed my whole mindset and how to deal with these types of issues. And during that time, I had the very good fortune to be introduced to Hazel Stutley, OBE, and her wonderful C2 team. And as a result of that, I visited Cornwall for myself, because I like to see evidence for myself, because I'm very suspicious and very doubtful. So I went to see Hazel, I met the team, I visited Falmouth and Redruth. The most amazing thing happened. I met this police sergeant who changed my whole mindset, and he talked about one evening when the residents turned up at the temporary police office. It was a porter cabin, and they cornered them because they were so outraged by the lack of partnership and participation of the police in the community. And what did he do? He put his hands up and said, "I'm sorry." He had a taser and a truncheon. He had other options, but his tactical option was to say, "I'm sorry, we got this completely wrong." Quickly followed up with, "How can we change this?" marvellous. And we heard from the geography person yesterday who talked about the ripple effect. And the ripple effect that had among that community was quite significant. So that then led to police patrols with residents, with paramedics, because one of the biggest risks in that area identified by the residents was the high levels of teenage drinking, who were then being taken to A&E departments to be treated. So I brought that assets-based approach back to the VRU and into Scotland. And the area that we decided to work on with massive number of deficits was in northwest Kilmarnock. So when we looked at the data zone for northwest Kilmarnock, we could clearly see that there were problems, ingrained, entrenched problems in northwest Kilmarnock. A population of around 3,500 people. We started off in a smaller data zone, but as things moved on, a positive contagion began to develop, and other neighbourhoods in that area began to look over the fence and say, why are they getting all this help? There was no money involved. It was just a transformational change of culture. But as you can see, this was the starting point. So when I talk about violence as a symptom, the top stat there says that hospital admissions, 321 per 100,000, which was compared to the national average of 95, that should be 100,000 as well. So straight away you could see that 3 times as many assaults were being reported to the A&E department and not to the police. In fact, only 11 crimes of assault were reported to the police during that period. So that tells me straight away there was a lack of confidence in approaching the local police. But then you move on and look at all of the other stats, and many of you in the room will be familiar with this range of chaos and complexity that lies within communities of this kind. Life expectancy was very low for Scotland and very low for the UK. Alcohol-related admissions were double the national average. Drug-related admissions, the 3rd highest in Scotland. The list goes on. The litany of deficits was staring us in the face. Now, when we were given permission by the community to enter into North West Kilmarnock, and that was very important, we asked their permission. We explained to them what we intended to do, and we were going to do it with them as equal partners. It took a few months, but they wanted us in there. The people that didn't want us in there were the established service providers, the local authority, the local police commanders didn't want us. And why was that? Because, as Jenny said yesterday, it was all about power and not empower. We wanted to empower and enable local residents to do more for themselves. And that's exactly what happened. And I'm sorry to say that these stats were taken in 2010, and it's got progressively worse. And there's reasons for that. I don't have the time to get into today, but we were pretty much forced out of that area and had to go elsewhere. But anywhere we tried this approach in terms of reducing and eradicating violence, it worked every single time. Less people going to hospital, less people going to GP. And then what happened was we conducted an asset mapping profile and discovered there were numerous assets that existed in North West Kilmarnock. Some of them you can see here in this slide. But through a series of listening events and very loosely following the Connecting Communities 7-step framework, we ran a series of themed listening events. Now, these were crucial because previously in the police we had a public reassurance strategy, which was a form-filling exercise. It was a load of nonsense. I was going to swear there, but it was an absolute load of nonsense. The listening events identified the key topics that residents wanted tackled. And the listening events identified those issues. But do you know what? That community not only identified the assets and what they needed and what they wanted, they went on to start delivering the services themselves. And this took months. It all happened very, very quickly. So we ended up with a whole list of new assets and services: a breakfast club run by residents, a homework club run by residents, a drug recovery programme run next door to the breakfast club and the homework club, so that the registered drug addicts could bring their children to the centre and could access the homework club and the breakfast club. Teachers were asking, why are these kids suddenly learning their sums and getting gold stars on their jotters? Because residents were supervising the homework and encouraging these kids to do better. And we continued with the themed listening events, with a job club and entrepreneurial initiatives. Some of the residents started their own businesses because they could see this gateway to doing more for themselves. However, we did face some challenges. I faced a lot of challenges from colleagues in the police. And at one meeting, I was referred to, and I quote, "You're just an organisational terrorist." And at that point, I thought, I've made it. That is my badge of honour for the rest of my life. I have made it. But what they were saying is that I was disrupting the normal processes. I was a disruptor. And I only realised that on reflection. And I've spoken to Hazel about this often, about the legacy that's left behind. The VRU are no longer in North West Kilmarnock, but the local authority completely revamped their services and created vibrant communities, which is an assets-based approach. That's a great accolade, I think. But I suppose the key difference was that residents became active participants in the services being delivered into their communities, rather than being passive recipients of services. And they did become more emboldened and more revolutionary, but that's a good thing. I think there's a revolution that started in this room yesterday anyway, so we're heading in the right direction. And as you know, the VRU, and all of our initiatives in the VRU, of which there were many, has led to a 40-year reduction in violent crime. We've had some murders in the past year, nowhere near as many as we've had in previous years. Very little knife crime, because there's a contagion of positivity that exists within the so-called deprived communities who have seen what they can do for themselves. And to finish off, to emphasise, it's all about the people. And the people that you see in these pictures here are all real people who live and work in that community. The stars of the show were the top, middle, John and Julie, who turned out to be a force to be reckoned with. And they were responsible for the breakfast club and the homework club and changing quite a lot within their community. And all they needed was just that little bit of support from the right people. Thank you.